Every Wednesday at this time, we talk NBA with Keith Smith, Yahoo Sports, Real GM, Front Office Podcast. Check it all out. Celtics blog as well. And every Wednesday right here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, as we have a ton of NBA and NBA playoff stuff to get into, where last night all of the home teams were winners. Sixers also on Monday night. Not the Warriors, though. Are they in trouble? We'll have more with Keith in just a second. Tonight it's Celtics Pacers Game 2. Bucks Pistons. The Bucks Pistons may be the worst first-round series in history. Has there ever been a more lopsided first-round matchup? Jazz Rockets, 9:30. Bring in Keith. A lot of NBA right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Man, where do we begin, Keith? What's happening?
Yeah, where do we begin? It's for real. There's a lot happening, and most of it good, thankfully, but some of it not so great. But let's get into it.
Yeah, man. First, let's go back to Monday night. Sixers make the adjustments against the Nets. Did you see enough in game number 2 to make you feel pretty comfortable if you're a Sixer fan, or does this one have the making of a back-and-forth fist fight that will land us to Game 7?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a bit of a long series. I picked it to be a 7-game series to begin with, mostly because I had concerns about Joel Embiid's health. I still have those. He played very well in Game 2, but he just didn't always look right. Wasn't always moving, the way he usually does, especially on the defensive end of the floor, and then just a lot of jump shots. From him, the less in Game 2 than in Game 1, which was good to see. But I think this one's still probably going to be a pretty long series. I just think, Philly's a better team than Brooklyn, but Brooklyn just matches up with them, really matches up with Philly's weaknesses quite well.
Well, the stuff that Philly made the adjustments on in game number 2, they really was on the defensive end in the second half. I mean, Brooklyn still shot the lights out in the first half. It was a 1-point game. That third quarter really might have changed that series, but Kenny Atkinson said afterwards, their intensity was the difference. Can Philly keep that up, or is that a question mark?
Yeah, I think in the playoffs you can keep that up because you're only playing, every other day, every third day right now in the first round, the way things are structured. So I think, asking the team to come out with that kind of level of intensity is not the, not the big ask it would be in the regular season. In the regular season, when you're playing 82 games and 3 and 4 nights and things like that, that's really hard to ask a team to do. But in the playoffs, I think you could do that. I think the other thing that's really important is just how engaged they were, as you said, defensively. A lot of active hands, a lot of turnovers, and then that allowed them to get out and running and get points on the run, which is big for a guy like Ben Simmons. He was far better in this game than he was in the other game, and they just didn't settle. They were aggressive going to the basket. So I think those are all things that can certainly carry over.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned Joel Embiid, 21 minutes, only 24 in game number 2. Realistically, if the Sixers want to make a deep run, those are going to have to go up. However, how about the difference between Ben Simmons in Game 1 and Ben Simmons in game number 2?
Yeah, the big things I would say for him is that he was kind of passive in Game 1, which is what we've seen in him when he's had struggles in playoff games. Now, it's a pretty small history because it only goes back to last season, but it's when he's passive, you just don't get a lot. And he's not a guy who can be passive because he's not J.J. Redick who can, still hang around the perimeter and draw defenders. He has to be, aggressive. He has to do things when he has the ball. Has to really make a lot of plays. And he was aggressive right from the jump. He started that game, even though the first half was close, but he started the game going to the basket over and over and over again. And if he's going to play like that, he becomes really difficult to cover because Brooklyn doesn't have a great matchup for him, especially if Jared Dudley's not available to play. That, he did a nice job against both Simmons and Embiid at points, and DeMar Carroll can do okay. They've got other guys they can throw at him, but it's not, no one can really handle him when he wants to play like that, and that was really important for Philly to see.
Yeah, and I know it looks like the three-point shot's going to be a big thing here for Brooklyn. If they can, the first half was close because they hit 10 threes. In the third quarter, they hit 0. Sixers won, 6 of 8 from 3. Historic 51 points. Brooklyn couldn't get back in the game or couldn't keep in the game because they couldn't hit the 3. It seems that Brooklyn, if they're going to hit the 3, they're going to be in this thing. If they're not, they're in trouble.
Yeah, it's a lot of what it boils down to. It also, it wasn't a great game for D'Angelo Russell, and if he can't get on track, they're going to have a hard time. He's the guy that Philadelphia doesn't really have an answer for in the starting five on who can defend him and do well. Simmons, yeah, at times can, but Russell was off. He missed a lot of open shots and then had some really silly turnovers in that game. Just things that were a little unforced, things that weren't great. And if he's going to play like that, it's going to be hard for Brooklyn to win. In addition to they're a high variance team with the 3-point shots, and that matters more for them than maybe almost any other team in the playoff field.
Talk with Keith Smith, Yahoo NBA, right here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Sixers in 1-1 with the Brooklyn Nets. Game shifts to Brooklyn tomorrow night. We'll have it for you live on 97.3 ESPN. The one interesting thing will be, we were talking about this last hour, if the Nets make the adjustment and go with Dinwiddie into the starting lineup, maybe for Harris, if that's a matchup problem for Philly with J.J. Redick.
Yeah, it would be, because what now you're asking is their really only playmaker off the bounce is D'Angelo Russell in that starting group. Now you're asking two guys to do it. You're probably going to have to then look, do you put Redick on Joe Harris and ask Butler and Simmons to carry the load defending the two ball handlers? That might be something you need to do. But, the Nets, my sense is they're not going to make that change. I just don't think Kenny Atkinson is the kind of coach who's going to overreact to one loss. They did win game one, and I think he's going to say, hey, if we play the way we did in game one, we should be fine. And now if they lose this next game, then it might be time to start looking at, all right, is it time to make a lineup change? But I do think you're going to see a lot more of the two of them together, and we didn't get a whole lot of that in game two. So I do think you'll see the two of them on the floor together, even if Dinwiddie doesn't move into the starting five.
Now, you had tweeted out during the game that the non-Embiid minutes were pretty important for the Nets, but that the Sixers might have actually been better in those minutes because Boban had such a big night.
Yeah, he was great, and this was when Embiid, he started that game very poorly. He just didn't look like he was moving well, and it looked like it was going to be, one of those things where, I think I may have even said in that game, like, is this now almost becoming negligent that you're even using this guy? Like, what are we doing here? And then, Boban came in and was great. He was almost unstoppable, and that's, really important now. It really kind of snowballed, as we said, in that third quarter and got away from Brooklyn. But I think that's still their best bet, is to get Embiid off the floor if they can with foul trouble. If not, when he's not in there, they have to take advantage by, going at the Philly backups, because that is one spot where Brooklyn has a pretty clear advantage in this series, and it's one of the only places that they do.
All right, game number 3 tomorrow night, of course, right here on 97.3 ESPN. Let's take a look at the Warriors losing by a 31-point lead, losing by 4 at home against the Clippers, and now losing DeMarcus Cousins. Now everybody keeps asking, are the Warriors vulnerable? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I don't think they're any more vulnerable than you maybe thought they were, a few days ago before all this happened. They're the most vulnerable they've been in this run, especially since they got Kevin Durant a couple years ago. But I don't think they're overly vulnerable. DeMarcus Cousins, in a lot of ways, was a problem for them on the defensive end of the floor. He can't move laterally, so it's a really hard teams, go at them and really put him in a lot of actions where he has to move his feet, and that's a problem. Offensively, I mean, yeah, sure, it's great to have DeMarcus Cousins, but how much more offense does the team with Curry, Durant, and Thompson really need? So I don't think that's a huge loss for them. And the Clippers' loss, in a lot of ways, I think might almost be a little worse for some other teams, because I think they might have got their wake-up call a lot earlier than they usually do in the playoffs.
Yeah, I know. It just seems almost inevitable, not only that they don't put that team back together, that they would almost be bored if they did put it back together.
Yeah, I mean, they were bored this year. They didn't push through the regular season the way that they usually do. They way as much like they did in the Clippers game. It was much more drastic because it was a 31-point lead, but they threw games away in the regular season, and they just, they're very much at the point where it's all about the playoffs for us. We just need to get there. I picked them to win in 5, and a lot of people are like, well, they're going to sweep this LA team. And I said, if they get up 3-0, they're going to no-show Game 4, because it's what's the fun in that? So let's just win it at home in 5, and that may still be what happens here. I think a lot of times when this happens and a team is upset, we saw it in a lot of the game twos. I think you're going to see the Warriors come out and really kind of remind the Clippers and everybody else exactly who they are, and that is something that they have done from time to time this year. Is hey, remember who we are. We're still the champs. You still need to go through us.
Last night's action. Let's dive into it with Keith right now here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Keith Smith, Yahoo NBA. Raptors, they answer after a Game 1 loss. They really clamped down on the Magic. I thought the defense, much like the Sixers, the defensive intensity was ratcheted up, but theirs was from the get-go in that one.
Yeah, it absolutely was. Orlando couldn't do anything. They couldn't get clean looks. They couldn't get any of their actions that they were getting a lot of mileage out of in Game 1. They just weren't there. Marc Gasol has done a phenomenal job on DJ Augustin, and then what everybody else is doing is on Nick Vucevic. And then Kyle Lowry did a good job of pressing up on DJ Augustin, make it harder on him. And then everybody else just, really locked in and made it difficult. And then you saw Kawhi Leonard, what a destructive defensive force he can be, where, he takes his guy away. And then as you think the ball is moving to the other side, all of a sudden there he is again, and he's making a play on that side of the floor too. He's, there's a reason why, if it comes down to it, you still want Kawhi Leonard if you need to get one stop at the end of a game to win it.
Sure do, and you didn't have playoff Kyle Lowry last night. You had a much better Kyle Lowry, but you're right, Kawhi, 37 points, a big factor there. But the Leonard the Lowry that you got in Game 1, he can't pop his head back.
And that's been a problem, right, in the history of the Raptors playoff history with Kyle Lowry is, he tends to go missing and play poorly, and he stepped up in that one. But
he was very good last night.
He was great. And if we get into Friday night, he struggles, that's going to be a problem, because all of a sudden we're going to be looking at it and saying, like, all right, what's going on with this guy? Now, this is yet another struggle. So we're going to have to see, him put together 2-3 good games in a row. And then obviously I think they're still going to beat the Magic. But, then in the next round and then the round after that, if they're fortunate enough to advance, that's when you need a guy like Kyle Lowry to step forward and be really big for you.
And by the way, if both the Raptors and the Sixers win, that would be your round 2 matchup. Spurs, Nuggets. I think a lot of people went with the Spurs, myself included, to win that series. Then they predictably, for many, won Game 1. But the Nuggets hung in there. They were down early in that game, and they come back and win Game number 2. What did Mike Malone do last night that allowed the Nuggets to pull out that home win when things didn't look so good?
I think the single biggest thing he did, and he touched on this, was he stuck with his guys. He touched on it with Jamal Murray. Jamal Murray was awful for most of the first part of that game. And then Mike Malone said, I had to stick with him because he's my guy, and I felt like it was important for his confidence and my belief in him that I, stay with him. And Murray, paid that back in spades. He made 8 shots in a row in the fourth quarter. All the stuff he was missing early was really open jump shots. Then he comes back, and late in the game, he's making all these leaners and fallaways and all this other stuff that, it's like, where was this guy in the first half? And that's really important sometimes. Coaches, I always like to say, as much as, fans and analysts and media, we say, why aren't they doing this? Coaches always know their team best. And, you feel like it's one of these things where Mike Malone, said, I'm going to go with the guys who got me here. And it obviously paid off for him in Game 2.
Yeah, 114-105. Spurs, though, do what all these teams, the underdogs, have done. They've got the split. They go to San Antonio. A lot of people thought the Spurs were going to win that series. Number one, where did you stand on that, and how do you see this series now after 2?
Yeah, Denver in 7, just, home court advantage being the, kind of tiebreaker there. But I thought that would be, a big, one of those long series where it goes. And a lot of times we see this with first time through the playoff teams. They just don't generally do well. They might win a round, but then they're out in the second round, or they sometimes even go out in the first round. You saw it with Philly last year. They won in the first round and then really didn't look so good in the second round. And that's generally tends to be what happens the first time through, because the playoffs are such a different animal for these guys than what they face in the regular season. I think that might be what we see with Denver here.
Portland up 2-0. They're the one team that's got the sweep on their minds. Oklahoma City struggles again on the road. And, you see Paul George has the big night, but Westbrook not, the leading man. And the Blazers, a lot of people question them when they lost Nurkic. And all of a sudden, here they are, 2-0.
Yeah, it arguably the one team that I think we all expected to not be in this spot. That they were actually the only higher seed team that wasn't favored to win. Oklahoma City was the favorite in Vegas, and by many analysts to pull off that upset. A little of that's building in on Portland's history in the last few years, but they're playing great. It all comes down to Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum. For them, they were really good in Game 1. They were both really good last night. They just, when they get it going, they're very, very hard to stop because they're very different from almost any other team in the league, because you have these two small guards who are really good with the ball in their hands, but can also do a lot off the ball, and that makes it really difficult cover for them. So I think they are, really doing quite well.
Keith Smith with us talking NBA playoffs is, of course, Keith Smith, NBA on Twitter. And tonight, Pacers and the Celtics. Let's dive into this one because the Celtics could be the other team that takes a 2-0 lead in a 4-5 matchup. That game was ugly the other night. 84-74, defensive battle. Do you expect something of the same? And do the Pacers have an adjustment in them? I mean, they just can't score.
Yeah, I do. To answer your first part of the question, I 100% expect it to be the same. I think this is how these two teams are going to play. They both ugly it up, and that's when they're both at their best. And for Indiana, there's just not a lot they can go to. Maybe they can go to Domantas Sabonis a little bit more if Thaddeus Young continues to struggle. The problem with playing Sabonis more is he tends to get in foul trouble. But you're exactly right. You hit on it. They don't have anybody who can create offense. There's a lot of that falls to play on Bogdanovich, and then the next best guy is probably Darren Collison or maybe Tyreek Evans. And, when you're down that far, it's just really, really difficult for you to score. And in the playoffs where everything slows down, you're struggling to create in the half court. That's what Boston did, especially in the second half. They locked in on the Pacers. I mean, we talked about 76ers third quarter. Boston's third quarter against Indiana defensively was one of the best third quarter or single quarters of basketball this year on the defensive end of the floor. The Pacers had no room to do anything at all.
Keith, another one, Bucks Pistons. This might be the worst matchup I can recall in the first round. Bucks just absolutely lopsided over the Pistons. Pistons appeared like, hey, we don't even want to be in this matchup. Can we please go home early and just say we concede? Do you see any reason why this series or tonight's game would be a close one?
No, I didn't know if we were to the first time TV timeout when I tweeted Bucks in 3. I mean, that's just how ridiculous this series is, and it's going to be. The Bucks are just going to roll over Detroit. It's the only one I picked to be a sweep. If the Pistons had a healthy Blake Griffin, they maybe could make things slightly interesting. They just don't have the horses to keep up with Milwaukee. And I continue to believe, I've said this all along, I think the Pistons' best bet is to play 4 smalls around Andre Drummond and just turn this thing into a track meet, shoot 50, 60 3-pointers. If that's what it takes, hopefully you get hot, really turn it into a high variance game that way, because if you're going to try to match up with these guys any other way, they don't have a chance.
Yeah, that series really ugly, and Blake Griffin, even if he does play, I don't know that the Pistons provide much of a push for the Bucks, and we'll see if the Bucks, they're a 15-point favorite in an NBA playoff game tonight. That one is 1-0 Milwaukee. Then it's Rockets-Jazz. A lot of people thought the Jazz would give the Rockets a little bit of problem. They did not really in game number 1. Could game number 2 be the opposite of some of these other series where the lower-seeded team escapes with a game 2 victory? Many of the teams won game 1 and then lost game 2. Could we get that flipped in this one?
Yeah, we could. The problem is Utah they haven't been able to figure out how to defend Houston, and that's been an issue. The Jazz are one of the best defensive teams in the NBA, but we're now into 2 years running where they just can't figure it out against Houston. They can't crack that code. The Rockets get it to a point where Rudy Gobert, you almost might be better with them off the floor because they've just figured out how to attack. So I have a hard time. I think Utah too. It's them and Denver. I think that probably need their home court as much as anybody else does in this series. So I think Houston will go up 2-0, and then maybe Utah can rally back and get 1, maybe 2 at home. But I thought that might be a 7-game series, and that's probably the single series where I've changed my mind the most. Where I'm like, yeah, Houston's probably going to end this thing, and maybe 5 at the most.
Yeah, and it would be interesting because the Warriors would have to play the Rockets in round number 2, right? I mean, so that would really be an eye opener to see where these Warriors, how they open up and respond to that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is why Denver, kind of did the Denver plan down the end of the regular season. They threw a bunch of games away, and really didn't push all that hard to get into to the number 2 seed. They ultimately landed there, but their whole goal was to get Portland into that 3 seed and bounce Houston to the 4 seed, and it worked for them. And that's now no, I don't think any casual fans really should be thrilled with seeing Rockets Warriors, but there is a belief that you would rather get the Warriors earlier rather than late before they get into a run. And if that's what we're going to see, well, Houston's shown us that they can beat them, so that would be one of the more impressive and probably watched second round series in quite some time.
Yeah, a couple NBA notes with Keith Smith here. Dave Griffen today said he believes Anthony Davis is now open to staying in New Orleans. Is David Griffen one of the key, or is that relationship with Rich Paul one of the key reasons why David Griffen is in New Orleans? And would you be surprised with the potential of Davis staying in New Orleans?
Yeah, I think you've got a couple of things at work here. I think, they do have a good relationship. They have, worked together in the past. They've made things happen. A lot of people say, well, LeBron got Griffin fired, and that wasn't even remotely true. LeBron was, immediately out in support of David Griffin, and that, seemed to be, somebody he enjoyed working with. And, that obviously translates to Rich Paul and now Anthony Davis there. But I think the other thing is, I think there might be a little bit of posturing here, because David Griffin's not going to, on his first day on the job, come out and say, well, we got to trade our best player. Start sending me offers, because those offers aren't going to be very good. If you start to even put it out there that, hey, we might hang on to this guy, we think we might be able to make this thing work, now all of a sudden teams are like, all right, well, maybe we got to throw in that one extra thing we were holding back on. So, I think David Griffin's a very smart, very good leader of a basketball operation. He's going to handle this thing. The Pelicans are in the best hands possible, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah, and I know he had mentioned during his work with either NBA TV or NBA radio on Sirius that he kind of had, they had asked him, what would you need to trade a guy like Anthony Davis? And he had mapped out a whole bunch of what he would be asking for in return. And now he ends up getting that job. It'll be interesting to see how he ends up handling that job now that he has it. And that is a pretty interesting storyline to keep an eye on. How about this story, obviously, here locally, this story with Colangelo out, the Sixers making the offer apparently for Bob Myers. And, okay, it's old news now, that was down the road, but they went after Morey, they went after Myers, they end up with Elton Brand. But I think what it shows is a level of commitment from the Sixers ownership that they were after some of the best names possible, and to land Elton Brand, people thought, oh, okay, I don't know much. But they must have really been impressed with Brand to give him that job after trying to go after these top-level guys.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my takeaway. If I'm a Sixers fan, is I'm excited because this says, ownership, they're willing to go big game hunting. They were willing to bring in the big dogs, the guys who are, considered to be among the best in the entire NBA. And then beyond that, they then double down on that and with their commitment in season to trade for Jimmy Butler and then trade for Tobias Harris. The ownership group there is, they're committed to trying to build this thing into a long-term sustainable winner. It's not that's all you can really ask for as a fan is, spend a lot of money, hire the right people, and then, stay out of the way and let them do their jobs.
All right, games tonight in the East, we've got Boston and Indiana, and then out West, we've got, Milwaukee, Detroit, and then out West, we've got Houston and the Jazz. Tomorrow night, Philly is back in action, and, of course, you can hear that game right here on 97.3 ESPN. Keith Smith, every week during the playoffs, we'll talk NBA right smack in the middle of the week as we've got great storylines, very compelling series so far in the first round, with a lot of them being 1-1. And we will bring him back to talk about what's going on next week. And we might have Game 6s and Game 7s to look at, or we could be looking at some series that are all wrapped up. Keith, we look forward to it, man. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.